right, people. Well, usually I'm recording these podcasts in a different topic. But this year, with some pressure from my fire chief, Scott Rarick, and just some general joking around almost for the last year, they're like, you should just start a fire podcast. You should start a fire department related podcast, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, we'll see. And I had to come up with a name and I had to have a purpose. And like podcasts aren't one of those things that just, you can't just say, I'm going to start it like this and this is what it's going to be. It has to organically develop per se. And so that being, welcome to the first episode of the Mad Bell podcast. And I'll tell you all right now, because this is episode number 1, Mad Bell it's twofold. One, I found the logo some time ago and I was like, man, that's kind of cool. And I was in the middle of the Orangeburg Fire Department. Our fire department bell went through a refurbishing thing. And I was like, it just all kind of works. And then Chris Fessler, Chumley, and we've been talking about podcasts, doing one together for 2 years. And I said that to Chum. I was like, oh man, I think the Mad Bell podcast would be a great topic. And Chumley said, you know what? You have to be mad to give half of your life to something that pays you $0 and that you can meet your maker at any time. And I was like, boom, there it is. That is absolutely the name of this podcast. So anyways, I am joined today for this first podcast, and you'll find out why this guy is here. Because he's sort of a podcaster in his own right. He doesn't even know it, just does it via email. Mike Glore from the Pottsville Fire Department. Well, I should say started in that area. But Mike, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of get into the aspects of why you're here.
Sure. My name is Mike Glore. As Frank said, I started in the Pottsville Fire Department in the mid 1980s. I've been a firefighter in Pottsville for just about 40 years now. I served as assistant fire chief in Pottsville for a term back in the early 2000s. And then I got on the job in Reading, and I've been in Reading for 17 years now, where I currently serve as first deputy chief of the C Charlie Platoon.
Nice. And we've known each other for a long time, since I got into the fire department in 97. And it's one of those early on, we became in contact, became friends, and then I got on this like secret list. There actually used to be a secret list. I gotta be careful using that term, because was it Billy Goldfeder
Billy Goldfeder has
a secret list?
Yeah.
But Mike sends out an email periodically. It varies, and I always read it, and it's such good information. But it's like historical data for the Schuylkill County Fire Service. Because that's, I think, something you kind of left out. You're heavily involved in that historical side.
Correct. Yeah.
What I don't know what do you call yourself? Like
let's just say
yourself a historian or no?
Unofficial historian. Let's go that way.
Unofficial historian. Do you serve in some capacity at Schuylkill County Fire Museum?
I'm a life member of Schuylkill Historical Fire Society.
Okay.
And again, Mike Kitsuck and I, as most know, have worked on several projects, including 3 books, and a variety of programs and presentations, both for fire companies and the Schuylkill County Historical Society over many years now. So that's kind of our background with it, and kind of my background with it as well.
Yeah. I guess so. With that being said, let's talk about that. And that's really one of the purposes of this podcast, is just, let's talk about the history of the fire service here in Schuylkill County. I'm a closet history buff. I am too busy to sit down and do the incredible amount of research that you do. But, can you just talk about how this started for you? And let's just kind of get back to the beginning of, how did the fire service get started in Schuylkill County and where it originated? Yes.
All right, Frank,
underlining tone to that, but go ahead.
We have about 200 years of ground to cover. So.
Yeah, well, let's paraphrase. Let's paraphrase.
But in all honesty, the way Schuylkill County Fire Service obviously pretty much began in Orangeburg. That's really one of the earliest, if not the earliest, organized firefighting effort in the county. And of course, Orangeburg was originally the county seat.
Which is a
Uh,
natural thing, I would
and
think.
time frame, we're looking 1809 to 1813. That date, I don't know that we've actually pinned down the date, but in that time frame, I believe the Pat Lyons hand pumper
Yeah,
is 1809. I
correct.
believe the date we have for the actual organization of fire company is 1813.
Oh,
So,
okay. I thought it was
again,
1828.
yeah, well, it may be because there are several different ways to look at that. And Pottsville is a classic example of that. In that the questions Mike Kitsuck and I often get asked are the worst and the first, right? What were the worst
We're not going
fires?
to talk about the worst.
What was the first? What was the first? Who had the first? Things of that nature, and it becomes tough to pin down. And Pottsville is a classic example of how you can have a variety of different angles to look at it. The first organized fire company in Pottsville was the Schuylkill Hydraulian Fire Company in 1829. The first chartered fire company was the Pottsville Fire Company in 1830. That is the predecessor of the Humane Fire Company of Pottsville.
Oh, okay.
So there's always a debate who was first because the Schuylkill Hydraulian ceased to exist during the time of the Civil War. It essentially disbanded. No meetings were held, no minutes were kept. And after the Civil War, it reorganized in 1867 as the Phoenix Fire Company, which
Okay.
still exists today.
Yeah.
Now, the Pottsville Fire Company eventually became the Humane Fire Company. However, they've had about a half dozen different name changes and charter changes in that period. They became the Humane, they became the Humane's Hose, they became the Humane Steam, then the Humane Fire Company. So there were a lot of changes there. Throw into this mix the Good Intent. The Good Intent was chartered in 1846, but is the longest continuing under the same charter with the same name. They have had no charter changes. So again, depending everything when we answer that question, there's an asterisk
Yeah.
because it
Always.
all depends on the angle you're actually taking with it. So it's an interesting debate, one that comes up frequently. And again, with Orangeburg, we're pretty certain Orangeburg was the first organized firefighting force, as near as we can tell.
That's cool.
But and then from there, in that early portion of the 19th century, many instances the histories are incomplete.
Yeah.
And it's become so difficult to try and pin down dates, and exact time frames.
Yeah, it's so important too. And we look back, and I even since my it's short in relative terms, but 27 years in the fire department, we look back on how we've kept things and how we've documented things, and we've done a terrible job. And I say that maybe I'm being a little bit I'm overemphasizing that, but like there's so many things that I look back 20 plus years ago that I wish we still had physical items, things
Mhm.
that you know like we think back and we're like, and how outdated stuff, how quickly things become outdated, because now we're knocking on the door of building a new fire station. We have a new rescue on the way, wet rescue on the way, and like we plan on, because we bought property, we're expanding, we plan to put a museum in. And when we do that, like I think back like, oh, I wish we had this, I wish we had this. Like I remember going through old gear decades ago, and I'm like, oh, why did we not keep like I'll give you an example. Like all of our previous fire chiefs, it would be so awesome to have a jacket from every single previous fire chief to be able to put in the museum, like stuff like that. And that's just, and maybe that stuff comes up, maybe some of the fire chiefs have them, and as they get closer to retirement age or whatever, and they're just sitting there, they're like, maybe they'll donate it back. I don't know, but like I'm just saying, like for other fire companies out there, or departments, or people that have a historical wild hair, like think about those things as you're going through, because we don't, like, all
Yeah.
we're worried about is answering alarms, pulling hose lines or whatever, and we don't realize this stuff till after the fact that we're older, like,
Mhm.
shit, I should have thought of this, and I
And
didn't.
oftentimes that conversation comes up with old fire apparatus.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
companies look back and say, "Man, we should have kept that. What a beautiful rig. I wish we would have never sold it." However, you have to look at it in the context of the times. It's just like today.
Yeah.
If we need a new fire engine, in order to fund that, very often we have to sell the existing piece of equipment. And
Yeah.
they were in, the same boat. Hey, we're going to sell this to raise money to offset the cost of the new apparatus.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a case where they necessarily even had a choice to keep it. They just needed that, to fund to fund their services the next day and the next year and on and on.
Um, I have a question for you in regards. So this is outside of the history. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. This is a little outside of the history and outside of the who came first, blah 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 blah. Although it would be cool to see like a list of like here's the doc. Maybe you have it a documented like here's the list of earliest whatever that we have, you know, asterisk, for everything. It would be kind of
Well,
cool to go
it's
to run.
interesting you say that, Frank, because I happen to have right in front of me the Schuylkill County firefighting book, and Mike Kitsock compiled the list of organizations that existed throughout the history, charter dates, etc.
Joe, the front of that book. All right, everyone. I
Finger
will
happiness.
post.
It's 14 years old this year.
I
So
know. Yeah, I remember when it first came out. Is that still available online for sale?
yes, it should be the various vendors. It's typically online, eBay. There are always a couple floating around, and some
Yeah.
local vendors. CVS and Crosona had a stack of them. Ace Hadasty's Hardware in Pottsville had several of them.
I will put, so this will end up on YouTube, Spotify, all those places. And I will put a link to buy that book in the comments. Do the proceeds for that go to the fire museum or
Both they were split actually between the Schuylkill County Historical Society and the Schuylkill Historical Fire Society.
wonderful? See, that's perfect. So, we have an ability to support all encompassing, and that's what this podcast is. This podcast is a fundraiser for my fire department. That's what this is. Maybe we all have things that we do that we can benefit from. I wanted to look inside of something like that I do on a regular basis for a different part of my career to raise money for my department because we're trying to build a new fire station and
Sure.
a couple million doesn't come without some kind of innovative whatever. So this is outside the box of the normal fundraiser. So more on that later on, or maybe before this, you probably as people watch it, you probably already heard about it. But anyway, so let's just talk about a little bit about the fire service in that time period, because I think one discussion that's I've never heard, I should say, unless you really dig into it, is how they actually fought fires. Because I'll tell you, this is my vision, not accurate. It's from the movie The Streets of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Gangs of New York City. Yeah.
Gangs in New York. Yeah.
Like that environment, that picture is what I have in regards to, is that really how firefighting, obviously that was New York City with the infighting and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm, can you talk to that point? Like what did it look like versus what it is today?
Well, certainly, organized firefighting, developed as collectives, and again, in many instances, the insurance companies drove some organization of that, because again, their losses became catastrophic almost.
Yeah.
A fire generally took at least the building of origin, if not, several properties surrounding it.
Right.
So again, organized firefighting became a necessary feature as communities develop, particularly the cities, the Philadelphias, the New York Cities, very dense, heavily populated, and highly combustible. With everything was wood frame in the early years, and again, fire codes became necessary. In that masonry construction
Yeah.
was featured to limit fire spread and things of that nature. But essentially, most know that it evolved from bucket brigades, simple syringes, almost like a needle, and that goes back to Roman times.
Oh wow.
And then the hand pumpers, as Orgsburg's pumper,
Yeah.
uh, they came into being, and they were very labor intensive.
Mhm.
And that's where you had the organized fire companies start to come about, where you needed a significant crew of people to operate these pumpers, particularly the double handbrake pumpers that were very labor intensive to generate what today would be a relatively meager fire stream.
Yeah.
But essentially it was, it moved with the technology. And the steam conversion, around the Civil War era, the conversion to steam made it much more efficient, and the pumping engines became much more powerful. And then eventually you saw the transition to career departments, where the nature of the size of the city and, the nature of the fire problem and such, they needed the full-time coverage. And also it allowed fewer number of men to operate the apparatus,
Right.
because obviously you didn't need huge numbers of men to operate the brakes on the hand pumpers.
Right.
The steam pumper pretty much functioned independently with an engineer to tweak everything and just keep the water flowing and the steam pressure up. So again, they're the transitions. Then of course we come into the gasoline era, in the early part of the 20th century, and
Yeah.
it moved on from there. I think most of us are familiar with how that developed from that standpoint. So again, a lot of it was just in the early stages. It was hugely manpower intensive simply to operate the apparatus. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a real quick synopsis in a
Sure.
nutshell.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to diving into that stuff. Like we can, I you are a natural first guest because of the history side of and the Wargsburg's history, and that's where the Mad Bell podcast is benefiting. Um, but I think that like we could probably do a series of discussions
Sure.
about those types of things, and I think that there's some time and tradition that gets missed with new members that come in, younger people especially. I know I missed it when
Mhm.
I joined the fire service. I was completely because I even though in generations prior, my grandfather was the fire chief in Port Carbon, it
Mhm.
didn't it's still like I didn't appreciate the generational knowledge.
Well,
And
Frank, you're making an interesting point that I try and make, particularly with the Looking Back series.
mhm,
It's tough to grab the younger members and
mhm,
make the connection
mhm,
to the importance, not just understanding how we got to where we are in terms of tools, techniques, and innovations,
yeah,
but applying the lessons learned from fires and incidents of the past to today. And a lot of times they don't develop. It's tough to develop that connection with them. And the point I make frequently with all the programs and presentations we've done over the years is that, and I go back to my dad's era, the
yeah,
mid 60s. I go back to his notes from one of the very first fire training programs he had taken. It was actually conducted by uh, Chief Russ Mogul from the Reading Fire Department. And in his notebook, he had a one line note. It said, "No two fires are alike." And by and large, there's a lot of truth in that statement.
oh sure,
However, we can't look at every fire as a brand new experience. Every fire we go to will feature similar elements.
yeah,
And we have to grab that and apply the lessons learned to the fire we're fighting today, the fire we're going to fight tomorrow. And I make that point frequently. We will have fires in the same neighborhoods, in the same blocks,
yeah,
sometimes in the very same buildings. We had fires in the past. What were the challenges? What were the water supply issues? If you're coming down the street with the ladder truck, which side of the street are the overhead utilities on? Is it going to hamper my aerial placement, whether the address is on the north or south side of the street or the east
yeah,
or west? What did they do 20, 30 years ago with a fire in the same block? What worked, what didn't work? Pottsville is a great example.
oh
The
yeah,
Bunker Hill neighborhood behind the Yingling Brewery
yep,
has really been a horror show for us
yep,
over the last 30 to 40 years. Every fire features the same challenges. We have the same water supply issues in
yeah,
that neck of the woods. So again, you don't have to relearn the same lessons over and over again. And that's part of the challenge. And that's why what I recommend guys when they read the Looking Back or see a post on Facebook regarding a fire is, what if that fire happened tomorrow? How would I fight that fire tomorrow? What will we do differently? Has anything changed in the neighborhood? Has the water supply developed more? And use that tomorrow. It's a real simple training tool too, and I think that's the connection I try and make with younger people.
yeah,
Don't look at it as simply an isolated incident that happened 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Look at it as, you drive down the street today, if that building's still there, that's a potential target for tomorrow. And that's a big part of why I do what I do and why I think it's critical for us to understand, what the history is.
I'm curious, how many people are on your email list now? Do you know?
I had to actually split it. The list got too big. And actually, I split it and I lost Spark Rarick. He stopped me at Dunkin' Donuts several years ago and said, "Hey, I don't get your emails anymore." But
Imagine
I
that,
think there's about,
Sparky at Dunkin' Donuts.
yeah, imagine that.
I know.
It's
So
probably about two. I think there's about 300 total.
300.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I thought kind of thought it might be higher, but
It
that's
may
still
actually be, that's a guess.
significant.
Yeah,
But
that's a guess.
here's where the podcast comes in, Mike, because the younger generation doesn't read emails anymore.
Mhm. Oh, correct. Yeah, it's social media. Yeah.
It's all social media. So I started, and I had messaged you. I'm like, listen, I started bringing snippets. It sucks taking them off of a PDF, but like, there's
Mhm.
probably a better way to do it. Or we could just record a looking back and share the actual photo so
Yeah,
people just watch the video.
sure,
Um,
that's certainly doable.
Like we could do that anytime you have one.
Yeah.
Like, and you could record it yourself. I mean, like I
Mhm.
can set it up and just put it into a podcast because it's a different delivery. Just like sending text messages to people, you can't get the emotion or the actual, like there's just a different feel to it when somebody's actually explaining it,
Yeah.
and you can physically look at the picture and hear the conversation and talk about like the knowledge of what happened in that situation. So I think that um there's a value to that aspect, and our younger generation isn't going to read a
Yeah.
PDF attached to an email.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
it's
just I'm
interesting
just
how
saying,
that's
like
yeah.
and I know because I'm involved in the social media world through my archery stuff, and come to realize quickly, like, man, Schuylkill County has a really vast historical mark on the fire service, but we don't really have anywhere to share it. And
Mhm.
that's definitely going to be a primary focus of this podcast, but also to try to push people to become more, to approach the volunteer fire service as more of as a paid department, a paid professional department. And I think that's something that's maybe outside the scope of what this episode is, but for volunteer fire chiefs, officers, and members, and especially younger members, to take a more serious approach to, you're still providing a professional service for free. Let's try to be as professional as possible.
Mhm.
And I think in order to really establish that message, you have to talk about the history.
Mhm.
So that's just so you guys. I mean, and I'm like I said at the beginning, man. My podcasts are definitely a little bit rough around the edges with a touch of I like to fly by the seat of my pants a little bit because I want to see where the conversation goes. I
Sure,
can always edit it.
sure.
Um, I don't know.
I
That's
think
just,
one of the biggest changes, I think, and we're seeing it, and it's actually changed dramatically since I started, just about 40 years ago. It was still very recreational when I joined.
yeah,
You know what I mean? You still had a lot of people joining the fire department. We still had obviously the bars in the basement, things of that nature, and you
yeah,
had people joining just for that aspect of it.
yeah.
Where now it's not as recreational as it was. Yeah, I think
No,
now the people you see joining want to actually contribute to the fireground or are looking for the training, looking to that aspect of it. And it's the old adage, right? I mean, $10 and a note from your mom, and you were a fireman.
yeah.
But I think that was the reality, and I think we're kind of seeing that we've got to transition a little bit more. That, as you said, this is something you're doing that you go out the door and
You know
you
what
you
it
know
is, and I think we definitely covered the historical topic, and we're just gonna let this thing ride out the way it's going. Um, you know what it is? It's the social media era. Everything, and I see it. I'm a basketball official. I see more official and referee abuse on social media now than I've ever seen. You know why? Because everybody's got a freaking phone out and they're videoing everything. And I always I tease Spark often about um we we use terms, and I tease him about, because he's the chief now, but we've had previous chiefs who were very good what if guys.
Mhm.
And back in the day though, when we were like a little bit more hard nosed and like, we'll be all right, let's go. Like there's some validity to all of that. It's finding the common ground of aggressive and
Mhm.
stupid. Oh, stupid, aggressive, aggressive, and smart. And like finding those, training people to be able to evaluate those moments to move forward, like in certain situations. And in the social media world, and everybody's got videos on their helmets and cameras on their rigs, and every business has or every house has Ring doorbells and everybody's like, we have to sharpen up a little bit. And for us, I'll admit it. Like for us, I joined in 97. We didn't have a bar, but we allowed people to drink at the station.
Mhm.
Shortly thereafter, within a year, maybe two, at the time, our fire chief at the time was John Fenstemacher. I don't remember if it was under John or under Dave Hardinger, but they just nixed all alcohol in the station, period. And
Mhm.
nothing really crazy happened or anything that I can recall. I was only 19 years old, you know what I mean? But
Sure.
that was one of the best decisions that we ever made, in my opinion. Like, because there's an attraction then for families to get their children involved in the fire service. And I know there's like a lot of hefty comments about like kids being in junior firefighters and all that stuff, but hey, I get the criticism, but at the same time, until you can come up with a solution to pay all fire departments, you got to shut up, because we need help somewhere.
Mhm.
And everybody's two-parent working households, everybody's, trying to hold down a job or two or three.
Now, Frank, you're not really directing this into a consolidation conversation, are you?
Oh, 100%. But I
I
mean,
know Dave
that's
Hardinger,
probably a whole
you
episode
know,
in and of
Dave
itself.
Dave Hardinger said something as you're talking. He told me years ago. He and I were having a discussion, and obviously, I think it evolved from some of the issues going on through the county fire chiefs with friction within some of the departments and
Yeah. Well,
companies.
that
You know how
doesn't
it is.
happen. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
doesn't
Dave,
happen.
Dave said, he said, you know what the best thing I have going for me is? There's one fire company in Orgsburg.
100% true.
He said that alleviates so much alleviate so many issues that otherwise you'd be facing, because it's almost like a social psychological thing, a
Mhm.
human nature thing. You have two or more entities in the same municipality, sooner or later there's going to be friction.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, because
Yeah.
their competition will develop in some form. You talked about it back 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? That's
The
what that developed.
gangs of New York
And
City.
yeah,
Look at,
some of
I
it
mean, and
still
that was,
carries in.
there was political funding behind that. There's political driven stuff. And I know that that's a depiction of history, but I really truly feel like in some aspects it's probably not that far off
Mhm.
in that environment. Now, that was already a very volatile environment due to immigration issues, religious issues, um, race issues, political driven stuff, and the fire department was right in the middle of it, which is
Mhm.
one reason, like in our department, even like when it comes to politics and stuff, like we try to stay as far away from that as we can.
Yeah.
We don't even get into like photo ops with
Mhm.
politicians. But that's again, that's forget all
Yeah.
that.
But
That's a different animal. We just
but in all honesty, there's some of the things that I do agree with you that future podcasts would probably be interesting topics.
yeah,
Because
consolidation.
when we talk about funding the fire service, I make this point, and I've made this point in some Facebook discussions over the past years or so.
Yeah.
We have to look in the mirror. We can't continually go out hat in hand
Yeah.
and saying you need to throw money at us, need to throw money at us, when we don't
Yeah.
look in the mirror and say, are we operating as efficiently as we can? We have an
100% true.
obligation too, and
Yep.
so you can't. It's kind of like we want our cake and we want to eat it too. We
Yep.
want to operate as autonomously as we can with as little oversight as possible, but we want somebody to throw more money at us.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way,
It doesn't work.
especially
Yeah,
in today's society.
yeah. It's just
I talk about that like I say that around I probably throw it around too much, and some people like are offended by it, but I'm like in my opinion, fundraisers suck. All right. Let me just say that. A lot of people, they run fundraisers usually for either, it's very few people truly are doing it for the benefit of the department. Sometimes it's an ego thing, sometimes there's a self-driven, thing that they're involved in, and they turn it into a fundraiser for the department, whatever. But in my opinion, we should be spending more time doing fire prevention, recruitment, retention, and training. In my opinion, volunteer fire service. I think, in my opinion, those are the three things that we should be focused on, not fundraising. I wish there was a way to bridge the gap of, hey, let's bring in people who don't want to fight fires and let's get them to do the fundraising. Or we come up with other ways that are, and because I'm a businessman as well, entrepreneurial type person, that let's find passive income for fire departments um so that there's ways for departments to have permanent income
Mhm.
and not have risk liability and time away from family. Because we lose some, and I did it early years. I'm early in my marriage. We lose some focus on, hey, our significant others are also a huge part of this department,
Mhm.
whether they're members or not, because we can't do the stuff that we do without them. And I just
Sure.
feel like, man, if we could refocus or change the mold in our departments on, let's focus on those three things. Let's take care of the people who are here. Let's focus on fitness. Let's focus on other aspects of health and whatever. Keep these people engaged. Keep fire prevention prominent within our communities. And let's work on training. And I'll use a term that Chief Rarick uses, cerebral firefighters. I hate that term, but it really does make sense. But he's not wrong. Like you do have to be able to think 10 steps ahead.
Mhm.
And you do that by education. I know there's a lot, certification don't mean nothing. And yeah, well, like I'll give you an example. And I'm rambling, but it is what it is. It's my podcast. People kiss my ass. Um, my friend Grayson Partlow, he's a firefighter down in Fairfax. He was in he was a dispatcher for, I don't know, crap ton of years. And he was like ready for a move. So at 28, he took
Mhm.
the fire test. And he was in the dispatcher, I think, since 19.
Yeah.
So he, or 29, 28, 29, he took the fire test, became a paid fireman. He's like, Frank, and we're friends through archery. He's like,
Mhm.
I don't know why I didn't do this in my teens. He goes, I said, but at the same time, he said, the good thing is I didn't beat the crap out of my body for 10 years. And now I'm 29. I could put another 20 years in.
Yeah.
And but we just constantly, talk about like his experience in his first year of being a paid fireman is probably equal to my first 10 to 15 years.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Maybe
Yeah.
even more. He sees more fires in a year than I probably see in 10. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and that's just the nature of the volunteer fire service. But you could probably say
Well, I
that
do
for
think too,
anybody.
you're hitting on an interesting point because there are some volunteer companies, and I'll, use those companies surrounding the Reading area too, and the more municipal area, larger urban areas of the state, those volunteer companies are approaching call volumes of career departments, and that gets tough
That's
to
true.
sustain without some kind of dedicated staffing program. When you're talking a volunteer company clipping 1,000 calls a year, that's, and again, as you hit on, with all the other demands, family, job, and all that, it becomes very, very tough to sustain that. And we see it more and more where municipalities and fire companies are starting to pay part-time in some fashion,
Yeah.
whether it's a staffing program, a stipend program, or something. They're starting to understand that we're going to have to fund this some way. Like, we can't, the demands on the time are such that
Yeah.
we've got to provide something other than a place to hang out for a few hours. But yeah, we see that these many volunteer companies, are the call volumes are such that, and that's essentially a kind of a Reading story in a way as well, where Reading was a huge. The drivers provided, I think it was described as the skeleton, and the volunteers provided the muscle mass for the Reading Fire Department for
Right.
years.
Right.
And essentially, it again, it what became not so recreational anymore. Training, there was a line of duty death in 1985, which changed many of the minimum training standards. It wasn't recreational so much anymore, and the call volume became such that you just couldn't rely on volunteers to be out the door continually, and eventually the city hired many of the most active volunteers on, and now we're no longer a volunteer organization. We're not a combination department anymore. And
What's
you know,
what is the Reading City Fire Department call volume?
we do about, on the fire side, probably about 7,000-8,000 runs a year, and EMS about 20,000 runs a year. We have about 95. We're now the fourth largest city in the state. We have 95,000 people in about 10 square miles.
Do you know, since you're the history buff, do you know what the call volume was when Reading flipped that switch from primarily volunteer to skeleton crew to full-time paid?
I'm going to go back, and again, this is off the top of my head. I'm going to go back to a series of newspaper articles the Reading Eagle did, documented 1992, I think it was, documenting the shortage of manpower in the Reading Fire Department. I believe at that time, I think they were doing about maybe 4 to 5,000 runs a year. I think.
Wow.
Now we've adjusted a little bit. We were about 10,000 runs a year a couple of years ago, but some of that stabilized. We adjusted some of our first responder calls, so we're about 8,000 now, I think, uh,
Okay.
annually.
And does that
Um,
8,000 number include EMS?
Correct. That would include EMS on the fire side. Yeah,
Okay.
that would include EMS. But again, figure 8 to 10 is probably a good ballpark on the fire side, and about 20,000 EMS runs
Oh,
on the
wow.
EMS side. Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's
it is busy. It's very busy, and that speaks to that call volume again. As I mentioned, when you start getting in at 800 to 1,000 in a volunteer organization, that's tough to sustain.
yeah.
With a true volunteer without some kind of dedicated staffing plan.
Yeah.
You're talking
Oh, yeah.
3 runs a day.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's a good clip.
We have periods of time now. It's only 1 or 2 days a week, but we have periods of time where we go like weeks on end with 3 calls in one day.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
one day. Don't
Yeah,
confuse
no,
it.
no, it's yeah,
But
it's
it's
isolated
the
events.
start. It's the
Yeah.
start. Like we have, and you might know, you might not know. Like we put in our call volume down here is definitely. It's not like crazy increase, but
Mhm.
the steady volume has increased, I should say.
Sure. Yep.
Instead of having, say we do 250 calls this year, which isn't a lot. In retrospect, it's not a lot, but for us it is, just because of
Mhm.
the volume, the volume of volunteers, active volunteers
Yeah.
that we have. It's a lot. Um, but you look at, compared to the years where we barely broke 200, and now we have a hospital. Like as soon as Rudders and the hospital were done on 61 South, call volume
Yeah.
like the first week we had like an accident with entrapment, boom,
Mhm.
right there. And now behind the hospital, there's lightweight multi-occupancy construction happening that's done with a standpipe connection that is a nightmare. But we'll talk about that another time as well. Um, and now we have another development going in at the top of
Mhm.
Brick Hill Road, going out of town where Madeline's used to be, across the street on that farm. That's going to be like 4 similar type buildings, huge buildings. We get to see the plans. We're looking at all this stuff, and we're like, we're truly not set up for this. Like
Mhm.
that's like we're a
It's
small volunteer single fire department that does not have an aerial.
yeah.
Honestly, we probably should in our first due. And not that our aerial companies who support us now, really that mean mainly being Schuylkill Hose, Rainbow Hose, and I would say Hamburg would probably be like number 3 there. Not that they aren't wonderful at supporting us, just like from a first due basis, the way that everything is going, sooner or
Mhm.
later we're gonna have to go down that road. Somebody's gonna in our first due is gonna have to go down that road. It might have to be us. I don't know. But I'm not alluding to anyone. People don't get any ideas. That's not what's happening here. I'm just like, well, I'm
Well,
thinking
you
30
you
years
speak
down the road.
you speak again, we talk about how the historical nature of things in the fire service changes over time. And
Yeah.
you brought up aerial devices, and that's an excellent point. When I started in the mid 80s, I think there were maybe 10 aerial devices countywide. In the intervening 40-year period, that's doubled. Now there's probably about 20. And in some cases it makes sense, as you're saying. And I'll give you an example. Pine Grove is probably one,
Yeah.
an area that was underserved in terms of aerial apparatus for years, that now has an aerial apparatus, and it makes sense. And as you said, the development you're seeing in your area, within the next 20 years,
Yeah.
somebody may have to make that decision that, hey, look, we need this capability here.
Yeah. And we
And that's,
joke around
and
about
that's,
it.
and that's how,
Everybody jokes around about it.
sure. But that's how historically things change. You
Happens.
have to
Yep.
adapt with what you're seeing. And we see some of the rural fire departments, that were historically, a very rural department, now have, big city fire problems. I think of the Fogelsville area of 78 in
Yeah.
Allentown.
Yep.
With the industrialization around that area over the last 40 to 50 years, it's pretty remarkable. And now you have big league fire problems.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's not, just a rural fire protection issue.
That's a great point. Yeah. I like that term, big league fire problems. I like that term. That's a solid it's a solid statement. You know, and just to go back to the previous point a little bit, Mike, so like here we're talking about, oh, you know, Orangeburg Orangeburg's not considering getting a ladder. People don't get twisted up, just so you know.
No,
But
let's keep that.
but let's
Frank, that'll
talk about
generate
it.
a that'll generate a
Oh my God, I
that'll
know. Oh
generate
my
a
God,
podcast
Orangeburg's
in and
getting
of
right now. They're
itself.
getting a ladder. No, that's not
You heard it
happening.
here
And I'll tell you
first.
why.
You
I'll
heard it
tell
here
you why.
first.
Yeah. I'll tell you why that's not happening. And we have this discussion all the time. We are ahead of the curve for membership purposes. However, we are not that good ahead of the curve for membership purposes.
Yeah.
You see fire departments who have ladders, have rescues, have specialty pieces, and they turn out one person. They turn out two people. Uh yes, in the paid fire service, you can get away with a ladder with two guys. You can get away, not that you should have to by any means. Staffing cuts, budget cuts, usually are the things that lead to that from my knowledge, my limited knowledge. But in the volunteer fire service, listen, we have to turn out, we have an engine and a rescue. The rescue needs to turn out with bodies.
Mhm.
It needs to. That's not a piece that should go with two people on it. If you add a ladder to the mix of a rescue company, like legit, and we're really not a heavy rescue. Like I know we're not a Yorkville. And I say that by volume of people that are trained to do technical rescue things. There's a handful of years ago we were, but I don't think technical rescue or heavy rescue should be determined by the equipment that you carry. It should be determined by the trained and capable people who are staffing that rescue, call in and call out. That's my opinion. But that's all, again, another episode. But if we can't turn out, and we do, we're ahead of the curve. Like, you know, we turn out 6 to 19. I think that was like one of our best numbers this year. On average, probably 12 members per call, somewhere in there. Daytime's lighter, 6 to 8, sometimes a little bit less. But like, if you had to start averaging out numbers, and Rarick will probably pull these numbers after he listens to this. But I'm saying you can't add a ladder into that, because what happens when, you know, who knows where you go out to West Penn Township and they add us as a ladder, because technically we'd probably be closer than Tamaqua, and
Mhm.
we send 6 guys out there, and then an accident with entrapment comes in Dare Lake. Well, let's say an accident entrapment comes in within Orangeburg Borough. What are we gonna do? We don't have, and people are so gun ho. Let's get a ladder. Let's do this. Let's do that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, do you have the staffing for it? Do you really? Because 5 volunteers do the work of 3 paid guys, in my
Mhm.
opinion. You know, that's just a number, a ratio I'm throwing out there. In a really good volunteer department, maybe not, but the vast majority in rural Pennsylvania, that might be a actually relative statistic.
Yeah. But I know where you're going. You're absolutely right. I mean, you can have all the equipment in the world, but if you're struggling to get it out the door, it's not doing anyone any good. So I appreciate your point. But again, going back to it, how historically the regions have developed over the
Yeah.
years. And you spoke to it, the development that's taken place in that 61 corridor
Yeah.
has been
Oh, it's crazy.
remarkable.
Yeah.
Over the last even 10, 15, 20 years is
Yeah.
remarkable. And it's only gonna increase. And that's gonna bring with it population. It's gonna bring with it all the firefighting problems that come with it, traffic volume, all those things that you're gonna have to cover. And we've seen that transition. I don't think that's I think you've seen that transition where rural areas have become not only suburbanized, but almost urbanized, in terms of population densities with the the condominiums going up,
Yeah.
garden apartments all that stuff. It's changed the complexion and it's
Yeah.
changed the firefighting problem.
Yeah. I think again, we're probably hitting like 5 different podcasts, standalone episodes that people are gonna be like,
And you know
you
what,
know,
Frank? I'll tell you. Here's what's important with that, and we talked about a little bit with the aerial devices over the years.
yeah,
It's not only how things have changed, but understanding why things have changed.
yeah,
Why does our company, who 50 years ago we had an engine and a tanker, and now we have a rear mount quint, a heavy rescue truck, an engine and a tanker.
yeah,
What happened to our response area to cause that? And it's important to understand that because that things are going to evolve.
yeah.
It's like
Well,
life. things are going to evolve, you know?
Yeah, it's good. It's not even just that, Mike. It's also like that discussion um of training, recruitment,
Mhm.
retention, fire prevention. How are you going to have time to worry about fundraising as call volumes continue to increase?
Sure.
And then if you have to turn out more people, we have to turn out more people because call volumes, because you can't rely on the same people. You
No,
can't.
no,
You get
it's
15 to 20 good years out of somebody,
yeah,
and that's it. And then they typically move on to some other role.
yeah.
And you're lucky if you even get that. You're lucky if you
And
get 10,
and
15 years.
and really and truly, especially today, because the demands you're describing are such that you really have to watch and pay attention to and be cognizant of, are there downstream effects with your people that you're
Yeah,
not seeing in the firehouse?
correct.
You know what I mean? What's
Correct.
happening in their personal lives? You know,
Oh, yeah.
are they suffering somewhere else because they're making a commitment that's over the top
Oh, I
to
guarantee you
this
that happens.
organization?
I
You know, and
guarantee you that happens.
we've seen it. We've all seen it. Anybody
Yep.
who's been around for any length of time has seen people go through that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's as leaders of the organization, whether it's a career department or volunteer,
Yep.
we have to be paying attention to this stuff. You know, what impact what we do, what impact is it having on our people from a mental health standpoint? You know, is it impacting their families? Is it impacting their children? And if so, how can we alleviate?
Guaranteed it is.
You know,
Well, I remember I don't know what your relationship status was when you got into the fire service, but I was 19, single, lived in an apartment across the street from the department.
Mhm.
I did whatever the hell I wanted to when I wanted to. And when I got married and well, I met my wife in 2003, and it was all great because she lived where she lived and I lived where I lived. Then she moved to Orwigsburg. We lived in Pine Brook in the townhouses. And guess who didn't change initially?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, dude. Stones dropped. I'm out. Didn't even, and I was,
Yeah,
it took me way too long to realize like you need to rethink
yeah,
this a little bit. And I know people, and it's tough because the fire service is demanding,
yeah.
but you have to as a volunteer fireman, you need to learn to draw the line somewhere.
Mhm.
Yes, people may suffer because of it. I understand that if you can't respond to something, like I have rules. Like if
Yeah.
I sit down to dinner with my family, I am committed to dinner. That's one thing that I do.
Mm.
Unless it's like a significantly huge situation,
Yeah.
there's a good chance if I sit down to dinner, my family gets me for that time. For if there's other things, my kids are involved, whatever, like I won't go. And
Mhm.
it sucks. It does suck. It because you don't inside you're like, I don't want to do that. But I mean, you have to be able to draw those lines if you want longevity within this place. If it depending on I guess depending on your circumstances. If you have
Sure,
kids,
there's got to be balance.
there's got to
There
be balance.
absolutely has to be balance, and you've got to establish that early on. Like you said, it's tougher with guys who start relatively young with very few
Oh
responsibilities
yeah.
and then transition into a family, and now all of a sudden, like you said, something's got to give.
Yeah.
And all too often, and we've all seen people where that the choice they made was a family that was sacrificed. And
Absolutely.
is
Happens
that
probably more
better
than we
or worse for
realize.
the organization? You know,
Yep.
it's tough, but we do have to pay attention to that. We really do.
Yeah. I think we bring a lot up, man. I think there's so many topics to discuss. I mean,
Sure.
we'll probably end up just doing this again. Like kind of, hey, let's talk about this. We're already almost an hour into this thing, and it's I didn't even get to do any of the other stuff because I want to like go. I'm gonna add in some like weekly. I want to if there's any training updates or
Yeah.
classes or news articles or things that are like significant that people who might miss them because their social media news feed doesn't show it,
Mhm.
that might get captivated by the podcast, and then we can take them and throw it in front of people. Similar to your historical
Sure.
efforts
What
with
what I what
looking
I'd
back.
like to do, Frank, to be honest with you, is perhaps do what you suggested. Perhaps we can, as I do the looking back, pick an incident or two,
Yeah.
and we can do. Hey, look, here's what happened. Here's what
Yeah.
worked. Here's what didn't work. Here's some of the challenges you may face today in the
Yep.
same area. And perhaps make that connection. Bridge from the past to the present.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I also think that we can utilize the podcast as a format to not just raise money. Obviously, I'm doing it for my fire department. That is my
Yeah.
selfish cause. I'm not gonna lie. People, as you watch this, consider making a donation. You can buy a T-shirt that's will be in the links. You can make it just a flat donation to PayPal. You can write a check. I don't care. Because we have to pay for a new fire station. That's cost multiple million.
And a
But
ladder truck, and a ladder truck. Don't forget
no,
about
no, no. Screw you,
that.
Mike. No, don't do that.
I think
Um,
I might have a connection at Glick that can put an Orangeburg
yeah,
Fire
yeah,
Department on Ascendant Tower. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
I'm gonna edit this out, man. I was editing it out. Wait, imagine if we were doing this live right now. Jesus. But no, but in regards to that, and then
Yeah,
the historical for fire, blah, 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 I just
yeah,
historical fire society, all that stuff. I can put those links in,
sure.
go from there. We
Sure,
can,
sure. You asked actually. I don't know. I guess we're starting to clip time wise, but you asked about training topics, and I just again want to make a bridge here a little bit. Obviously, today the EV fires are a
yeah,
significant topic in the fire service. Again,
yep,
there's training out there now. There's a tremendous amount of material available online. Some real good information.
yeah,
I know Pottsville is developing a set of SOPs that will probably larger mirror what we're using in Reading
yep,
currently. But I make this point because as I said, drawing that historical comparison, that's the topic that's predominant today. And certainly it's a firefighting challenging that we're faced that's relatively new to us. And I liken it to the generation that fought fires in the early part of the 20th century when
yeah.
petroleum based fires were just coming into their own,
Oh
and the
yeah,
challenges they faced. It's a
yeah,
similar situation. And like the fire service does, we adapt. Tools, techniques, and technologies will change to address the fire problem we're experiencing. And you probably remember this because you came in when we were the mid 1990s. Carbon monoxide detectors.
yep,
Nobody knew what to do with them.
yeah,
They're all kind of quick fixes to get out and meter. I know Good Intent in Pottsville had one of the first multi-gas meters in the region, and essentially went all over the place with it because no one had one yet. And today it's a routine response for us.
yeah,
I hate to use the word routine, but it's a common response for us.
yeah. You're
You know what
right.
I mean? And everybody is capable of addressing whatever they see, but it changed dramatically in this 30-year period.
Oh yeah,
Vehicle rescue is another good one. In the mid
yes,
70s, when you had Yorkville, Ashland, Monterey City, Tamaqua, and now, you know what I mean? It's something that it's not, but everybody has some kind of capability for the most part,
yeah.
So
No,
that's changed dramatically too.
yeah, we did lithium ion with Guy Arndt a few weeks ago, and then we had day one last week of the EV
Hmm.
class. And and I know again, people say, oh, certificates, training, Yeah, but listen, if one piece of knowledge that comes from that training saves
Yeah.
a life, prevents a life from being taken, and you can, and I'll tell you why that maybe hits home a little bit in Orangeburg, and we'll probably cover it at some point in time, the tanker explosion.
Hmm.
We have line of
That's
duty deaths
that's
in
an
Cleveland
excellent
County.
that's an excellent podcast in and of itself
Oh, absolutely.
because
We'll cover it. We'll
yep,
cover was that September-ish?
but yeah, 1959.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We'll cover that in September.
I'll tell you what, let's do that. Let's plan on that, and I'll of course pull all the resource, the
Yeah.
fire engineering pieces, all the stuff that I have available for it,
Yeah.
and we'll cover that as a standalone piece because it did change the way the fire service approached
Yeah.
pressurized
Containers.
container
Yeah.
fires. It really did. And that an incident in Kansas City probably changed the game in terms of training and stuff with it.
Yeah, and we can talk about the Kansas City incident.
Sure.
And not just for that call, any other significant calls like was it the Race Street fire in Pottsville? Was
Pierce
that
Street.
where the
Pierce.
kids perished?
Pierce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pierce Street, yeah.
Yep.
Because that was next to, actually I was youngish. I think I was 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there, I think, if I remember correctly. That was right next to my cousins, my aunt and uncle's home. So like we can get into topics about those situations and
Mhm.
take those calls, kind of review them, talk about maybe potential improvements that could have things that could have been done differently so that
Well,
as people
here's
come through. Go ahead.
that's an excellent example of paying attention to fires in the same neighborhood. That
Yes.
fire in 1993 in Pierce Street was, oh, look, we have to change what we're doing here. This worked, this didn't work. It was devastating, double fatal, two kids.
Snow.
Yeah, blizzard of 93,
Yep.
everything combined. It was, like I said, it was a Murphy's Law fire if ever there was one.
Absolutely.
However, in 1993, we never thought that 20 years later, we would have an even deadlier fire a block away.
Yeah.
Same street,
Yeah.
same street. And it's one of those things where you've got to prepare because the same challenges, were faced: the narrow streets, the water supply issues, a heavily involved home,
Yep.
exposure issues, everything we needed to address again. So you've got to apply those lessons from the past to the fires you might face tomorrow.
Yeah, our Orpheum fire here in town,
Yeah,
which is
cool,
actually gonna,
yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be in the introduction of this, a picture of it anyway. And
That's what it's 2006, I believe,
yes,
if I remember correctly.
yes,
Because I know I was assistant fire chief from Pottsville down there for
yeah.
that
My
fire.
wife was pregnant with my son because she was definitely a little worried.
Yeah,
I'm running out the door, come running around the corner, and that's a fire that we can out
that's
we can outline that fire and maybe have maybe even bring Dave Hardinger and Sparky
yeah,
on and talk about like that specific fire if they're willing. I know that was an experience,
sure, sure.
it's a we had a save technically. But the ironic part about that fire, I lived in the apartment that those two women were in.
Mhm.
So I knew the layout. I knew,
Yeah,
and but that I'll save that stuff.
yeah. But that would be an excellent topic. I think
Yeah.
that's a good fire to have a time, particularly as with a focus on Orgsburg.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we could probably bounce around to large fires and or difficult fires,
Mhm.
difficult situations. We had rescue calls that we could talk about and
Sure.
how we handle them, what we did right, what we did wrong. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. There's so many reasons for this podcast, but one of the things I think is just to encourage people to see what they're doing from a different angle. I want people to appreciate the history, but I also want them to be like, it's okay that you make mistakes. It's okay
Mhm.
that that things don't go perfect. Just
Yeah,
don't repeat it.
exactly.
And
You
as
don't have
much
to
as
learn the same lessons over and over again.
God bless I was not on this fire. God bless the people, but the New Tripoli fire, where those two men
Yeah,
perished as well. We if we have the ability um to learn from our mistakes and then try our darndest not to repeat those, this is an
sure.
opportunity for us to do that.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100%.
So anyway, all right, man. Well, we're over an hour. That didn't take long. Um, I
No, that
appreciate
went
the
quickly.
time. Well, it
Good,
went
yeah,
really quick. Yeah.
yeah,
But that's what happens when we get together.
sure,
Like, honestly, if we could have been a fly in a wall on
yeah,
multiple conversations throughout our careers
yeah,
with multiple people and recorded it and like had the ability to be like, oh, I'm putting this out there. Imagine the amount of education and knowledge that would be out there outside of
sure,
classes, you know?
sure.
So that's what we're gonna try to do. So, all right, man. Well,
Sounds
you have
good.
a good day, get some rest,
All right.
safe at work. We'll maybe we'll have to dive into the history of Reading Fire Department at some point in
Yeah,
time too. I
we'll
don't know.
yeah, we'll get together. We'll kick some topics around and see what direction we want to go.
Yeah,
But I
and
think it's a
guests
good
too.
idea.
If there's
Yeah,
people that you think
sure,
would make good guests, please let me know.
sure.
Okay.
Sounds
All right,
good.
dude. Peace
All right.
out. Take
Cheers, Mike.
care. Talk to you
See ya.
later.
So long.